again, and to allow us as much time as possible for questions. We will begin with Senator Whitver.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you to the Chamber and our sponsors, as always. We just finished probably one of the most important weeks of the legislative session every year is Funnel Week. We just finished that yesterday, and essentially what Funnel Week is every year over 1,000 bills are filed at the beginning of the year from all the different legislators on all the different ideas that we should consider for the year. Throughout the first, 7 or 8 or 9 weeks of session, we work on those bills, and Funnel Week is a crucial week where a bill has to get through a committee in order to stay alive. If that bill does not get through committee, it is dead for this session. There's some caveats and there's ways to bring things back sometimes, but in general, if a bill didn't get through the funnel this week, it's dead for the session. And so this is a very crucial week of every session. And so a lot of bills that did survive the funnel. The ones I would point out, just talking about the governor's agenda in the Senate, most of her priorities did survive the funnel. A children's mental health reform bill did survive. Her Rural Iowa Initiative bill did survive. The one that didn't survive in the Senate is the felon voting right that she proposed. That did not get through the Judiciary Committee this year. I believe it did survive in the House, so that bill, because it survived in one of the 2 chambers, is still alive. But in the Senate right now, that's dead. And so until the House takes further action, the Senate bill is not alive. Since last time we did, I know we talked about the K through 12 funding at our last legislative update. Since that time, we did pass that amount that we talked about last year, which was $90 million new to K through 12 education. We did pass it within the 30-day statutory period, so we got the number to the school board so that they can start working on their budgets, so we're happy to get that done. And then the other item I would just point out before I turn over to John is budget targets have started to come out. So the Senate and the House have both released our budget targets. We're about 6 or 7 weeks ahead of schedule as far as working on the budget. Because we've made some tough decisions and our budget's in a much better place now, we're able to get started way earlier on our budget. And so the Senate has released a budget that on its face looks like it's status quo, 0% increase from last year. Last year, after we end up with our supplementals, we're going to spend $7.619 billion, $7.6 billion. This year's budget target is that exact same number. So it sounds like we're not increasing spending at all, even though I just said we're giving $90 million to K-12. And so what you have to understand about this budget is last year we had several one-time expenses that we had in our budget last year that now we don't have. The biggest one of those was a cash reserve payment. We had borrowed some money from the cash reserve to balance the budget. In last year's budget, we said we're going to put all that money back, $113 million back. We did that to fill up our cash reserves, and so now we don't have that expense. That opened up $113 million from last year that we could use on other priorities. There are other one-time expenses with Medicaid and so forth that make up that difference. So while it looks like it's a 0% increase year over year, and it technically is, some of that is new spending because we don't have expenses from the past. And so over the next few weeks, we'll continue to work on the differences between the House, the Senate, and the governor as we try to work through that budget. So. John?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks to the Chamber for hosting us today. We really appreciate the chance to be here with all of you. As Jack said, our first funnel has passed. It generally marks the halfway point in the session. This week marked that time when bills that have not passed a full committee in either chamber are considered dead and are tabled for this year. Most often, bills that do not move forward lack either support or they have major flaws that need to be worked out over the interim. Bills assigned to the Appropriation Committee or to the Ways and Means Committee, which is the Tax Policy Committee, are immune from the funnel process. So those bills can be brought up anytime until the day that we adjourn. My first 2 years in the legislature, I served as vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee. In the last 5 years, I have been on the Appropriations Committee, and working with the state budget has been my main focus as I co-chair the Admin and Regs Budget Subcommittee. Our committee works to appropriate over $50 million to a wide variety of state departments and agencies. We have completed the budgeting process for the House and have a bill that is being drafted at this time in LSA, and I expect that bill to be debated on the House floor in the coming weeks. And when we pass it, it will move over to the Senate for their consideration. And our committee has proposed an appropriation of $52.421 million this year. It's a little bit higher than last year. We've had several things that have come up that have caused that, and some of them are a one-time expense. The Senate has released their target, which is higher than our number, but that's because they still have a component in their bill that we don't, which relates to the expansion of broadband in rural communities in Iowa. We have moved that portion out of our budget back to the RIF budget where it'll be considered. Senate, if the Senate would agree with us, then our target would actually be $1.9 million below the House appropriation, and I will continue to work with my Senate counterpart to reach an agreement on that issue. A couple of the key bills that survived Funnel Week that I wanted to talk about were House File 546. This is an extension of the SAVE penny sales tax. It would extend it through the year 2050. This bill ensures that our schools have the resources needed for safe and modern facilities across the state of Iowa. A larger portion of this tax will go to property tax relief. The school funding process would enhance school security, pay for technology upgrades, and job training through their career academies. All 4 school districts that I represent are growing districts and will have a significant infrastructure need within the next 30 years. And here in Ankeny, there's probably no bigger issue than growth of our schools. And my effort, and this effort has been my highest priority in the year. It's been my highest priority since I got there, and I'm really glad to see that we have a bill that moved. It will have a profound impact on the future growth of Ankeny. The other bill I wanted to mention was House Study Bill 206. The House is working to establish a framework for children's mental health support. We want to ensure that Iowa kids can access the services and find the support they need. This effort will build on last year's legislation that helped fill many of the gaps in Iowa's adult mental health system. And I know there are many other topics and bills to discuss, and I look forward to hearing about those in your questions. Thank you, Representative Matson.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for being here, and thanks to the Chamber for hosting as always. It's really exciting to have gotten through my first funnel week. It was exhausting, but good lessons. So yes, 8 weeks in. I just want to highlight a couple of things because I really want us to be able to get to questions. The governor's mental health bill, I serve on the Human Resources Committee, so we took that up this week and very excited that it passed with strong bipartisan support. One of the things that I do want to mention about the bill is that it is very much a structures bill, right? So it's establishing some kind of structure for children's mental health. It is not a funding bill. So keep that in mind as you're thinking through, what we've accomplished so far, and knowing that this is just one small step in what needs to be done and still needs to be done. So I'm excited about this step, but I just want everyone to be thinking about how we can't just go, yay, we did children's mental health and move on. Like, that's not where we're at. One of the things that the bill does is really kind of overlay a children's mental health system over the current adult system, which seems like a reasonable way to approach it. But there are 2 components that I feel like are really missing from this bill that I think we still need to be talking about and focused on. One of them is prevention that is not really addressed in this bill. For example, for a child to get care in this system that's being developed, they need to receive a diagnosis. And first of all, we have 31 child psychiatrists in the entire state. It's really hard to get a diagnosis when there aren't enough providers to do that. So keep that in mind. And when we diagnose kids, not that we don't want to do a diagnosis in certain circumstances, we do, but think about how that diagnosis is going to follow these kids forever, right? So we need to think of how we're going to address prevention beyond this bill. The other piece is, like I said, there's no funding in it yet. And so I am hoping that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are in the majority putting together these budgets are really going to be putting this front and center, not only making sure that we are funding our adult mental health system at the rate that it needs to, but any program that we put together for children. The other healthcare piece or human resources bill that got through this week was the governor's bill on over-the-counter birth control. And I'm very happy that that passed with very strong bipartisan support, which I wasn't really sure how that was going to go over in the committee. It passed, I think it was 19-2. And I think this is a really good step forward. So first of all, what the bill does is it allows the medical director of a pharmacy to create a standing order for self-administered birth control without a doctor's prescription. And this is done in a number of other states. It's done in a number of other countries. Birth control is recognized as safe. And so we are at the point where this is a very reasonable thing to do. And the fact that other states are doing it also helps. We have, there are a lot of components to the bill that ensure safety and affordable access. So my biggest concern before I saw the bill was that by moving it to, whether you want to call it over the counter or behind the counter, but just essentially without a prescription. When you typically move medication to over the counter, it is no longer covered by insurance. So that was my biggest fear before seeing the bill, that would be what was in it, was that it wouldn't be covered by insurance. And there's a big difference between making something available and ensuring that it's accessible. Because if it is not affordable, then it is not accessible. So my concerns were alleviated. The bill does include insurance. So that's important. The other piece is that pharmacists, work with the patient when they come in. They have to do a self-risk assessment. They have to do a blood pressure test. All of these things to make sure that they're getting the right dosage and the right prescription, essentially. So I'm really happy with the bill. There are some pieces that I wish were a little bit different. I don't think it's perfect, but I'm glad to see that it's a good step forward. Glad that it's bipartisan. My bigger concern is really that we still have healthcare deserts all across the state, particularly when it comes to women's health. And while this bill rightly addresses and helps provide accessibility, and I'm very glad about that, part of why we find ourselves in this position is because in 2017, the state defunded Planned Parenthood, which led to the closure of 4 clinics across the state. And so if we want to actually make sure that women have access to care that is affordable and accessible, then we should both fund Planned Parenthood in terms of family planning, and we should also make sure that birth control is over the counter. I think we can do both of those things, and that would be a responsible thing to do for healthcare. So I will turn this over because I could talk forever and I really want to get to questions. So thank you for listening on those points.
Thanks to the Chamber and thanks to all of you for attending. Great turnout today. Happy spring. Don't forget, we spring ahead. And then it's this weekend, this Saturday night. Thank goodness I have this. I don't have to remember. It does it automatically. Thank God for our toys. Budget. We are happy to report that Polk County's fiscal position remains strong, and we're able to fund most of the items requested by the offices and departments. Polk County's upcoming budget for 1920 is $282 million. We saw strong growth in property valuations, as did Ankeny, and thanks to Ankeny and all of Polk County, resulted in a 4.8% taxable value increase. We continue to get the $6.4 million of commercial and industrial rollback, the fill from the state, but we do anticipate that that won't last forever, and next year it may begin to scale back over the next few years. At Polk County, we continue to look for long-term solutions to funding mental health services that are provided by Polk County. Current legislation only allows our budget to capture another $240,000 because of population growth. The cap was set in 1992, and we cannot exceed that cap. We do have some provisions this year, but that will sunset. However, in our mental health services, the expenditures exceed revenues by $6 million if we were to continue the programming as it is today. If something changes and we're not able to capture the funds, there will be service cuts. Now, I have an idea, because legislation says that counties can't take money from general fund and put it to mental health. But I'm suggesting to my fellow supervisors that we do it anyway, and we'll get thrown in jail and might make a good headline, right? Just kidding. I can't afford jail. One thing I'd like to bring to your attention, and I know that this is a House study bill, and our two members here are not on the Ways and Means Committee, but I just kind of, it's something I want to put on your radar, my radar, and I'll ask our legislators to look into it. It's House Study Bill 165, comes out of the Ways and Means Committee, and if I'm correct, it's funnel resistant, so it will be moving through. On the surface, it probably looks like a good bill. It's an act establishing budget limitations for counties and cities and including applicability provisions. Basically, it's a 22-page piece of legislation. The bill removes the property tax levy rate limitations on the general and rural funds for counties and on the general fund, and it goes on and on. There, for fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020 and subsequent fiscal years, the maximum amount of property tax dollars which may be certified for levies shall be an amount equal to the sum of the current fiscal year's total property tax dollars certified by the county and cities multiplied by the annual growth rate as defined in the bill and the amount of the net new valuations taxes as defined. I don't get it. But what I do know, and I'm very disappointed, not with you. I'm disappointed with my fellow row officers, but I was here last. I'll wrap it up with. I was here last month saying if I had my way, we would lower the tax levy in Polk County 21 cents. They're not going to do it because of this.
Afternoon. I just have a couple of things that I wanted to brief you on, and I'd start off with development and job creation here in Ankeny. And I'm talking about two different kinds of development, both commercial and what I'm going to call public development, I guess. I was talking with Senator Whitver earlier about the library, and he thought it'd be a good idea to update everyone. So just this street right here, just at the end of this street, if you go up, you'll see the new library is moving very well along in construction. And it should be ready to be open, providing everything works out as planned, sometime August to September, somewhere in the fall there. And just briefly, if you haven't heard already or seen pictures or drawings of it, it's going to contain several different things. Obviously, the library, lower level will be youth library, upper level will be adult library. The foyer, I guess is for lack of a better word, which goes all the way through the building north to south, is kind of offset from center. And everything to the east side of that foyer, on the ground floor, there will be, I don't know exactly how big it is, but there'll be some very nice public meeting spaces and meeting rooms. Upstairs on the east side, south side of the building will be the new city council chambers. That's where the city council will meet and the Planning and Zoning Commission will meet. City Hall will stay right where it's at. It will be reconfigured probably eventually a little bit. And then the current Kirkendall Library, if you're familiar with the Public Services Building, and if you've been around Ankeny for any period of time, the Public Service Building used to be the Mercy Clinic. So it's a very chopped up building. once the library is completed and Kirkendall moves into its new location, the current Kirkendall Library will be reconfigured, and all of the city employees that are currently in the Public Services Building will be moved into that. And right now, that Public Services Building is a leased facility by the city, so we will be out of that. With commercial development and job creation, in the last 2 or 3 months, maybe not even that long, the city has done quite a bit in that area, and there's 3 particular companies that really I want to talk about. And some of you have already heard me talk about these at different functions, and I hope the rest of you have at least heard about it through the media or what have you. But Ruan Transportation is coming to Ankeny. They're currently on, I think it's Park Avenue or Bell Avenue, I can't remember which one it is in Des Moines, and they are they have a permit out now for about $10 million worth of construction. They're bringing 40 new jobs to Ankeny and relocating 60 jobs here in Ankeny. The next one is Craig Tool. They're currently located in Huxley. They've got a permit out for about $34 million worth of construction. They're bringing creating 20 new jobs, and they're relocating 230 jobs here to Ankeny. And the last one that we did was Northern Tool and Equipment. They've taken out a $75 million construction permit. They're relocating to Iowa, so these are new jobs to Iowa. Over a period of time, a little over 200 new jobs. So and all 3 of these companies are going out to the Crosswinds development, which is out by the DOT, and the name just blew out of me. Corporate Wedge, yes, thank you. So anyway, we're looking at about $115 million worth of permitted construction value there, about 283 new jobs, and about 290 relocated jobs. And we do have a few other things in the pipeline, but the job creation and the commercial development is very good in Ankeny. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about was our budget. We're just about ready to wrap that budget up, and for those of you that aren't aware of it or that have participated in it before, or if you want to participate in it next year, we go through a fairly extensive process in our budgeting. We have a series of quite a few public meetings that everybody can come to. In December, on the 19th of December, we had an extensive meeting on our 5-year capital improvements program. Every year we update this 5-year program and prioritize what the capital improvements in Ankeny are going to be. January 28th, we had another meeting. We talked about all of our operating funds. February 11th, we had another public meeting and discussed hotel motel funds, solid waste fund, utility funds, which are the water, sewer, and stormwater. February 25th, we reviewed those funds again. On the 28th, the city manager provided a budget summary to the Chamber of Commerce Public Affairs Committee, and then later that evening presented about an hour's worth of public presentation on the same thing at the City Hall. And then Monday night is our final meeting on that. We're having a special city council meeting, and that is for the purpose of a public hearing on the 2020 budget. And speaking of the budget, this year we are going to reduce the general fund levy by 15 cents and the debt service levy by 25 cents for a total of a 40-cent reduction in your property taxes per thousand. And one of the interesting things about that is this will be the 6th year in a row that the city has reduced property taxes. And I believe that the school district is also set to reduce their property taxes, and this will be their 8th year in a row. So, and the reason I'm telling you that is that a lot of times I hear that whether they're Ankeny residents or somebody that's not an Ankeny resident, is that taxes are way too high in Ankeny. And the dollar figure that you're paying may be a large dollar figure, but it's based on the value of either your home or your commercial property. And just earlier this week, the local option sales and service tax passed in about 5 or 6 communities, and all of those had a tax reduction component. So I'm not sure where everybody will settle now in the region, but Ankeny was set to be about third from the bottom in taxing jurisdictions in the metro as far as low taxes. So I don't know where that's going to wind up now with these new reductions from the loss or not, but we're still going to be way down there. So I would encourage you, when that topic comes up about taxes being high in Ankeny, ask people if they know what they're paying, and tell them that we have been and we currently are way below the median of this. Even when you combine the city, the school, and the other taxing authorities, we're still below the median property tax level. That's really all I had to discuss. Oh, one other thing, I guess, like I said, we did reduce the property taxes. There are one thing that we increased only because we were passed along an increase from the Des Moines Water Works. Water bills, or your water charges, will be increasing by 7%, and then there's also a 75-cent increase from the Metro solid waste. So those will be going up. And then last Tuesday, DART passed a 2.5-cent levy increase. But even with those, we're still substantially below what we've been in the past. And with that, I'll wrap up my portion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your commentary. Now we will begin the question portion of today's update. We'll take questions in the order you signed up earlier, beginning with Scott McCormick. Scott, you're up. Please come to the mic, state your name and address before your question.
My name's
1 minute to go.
My name's Scott McCormick. I live here in Ankeny at the Vintage Cooperative Housing, relatively new resident. My question concerns the proposed changes to the system of selecting Iowa judges. The current system we have has been rated by our host, the Chamber of Commerce, as being 13th out of 50 in lack of partisanship and quality in the U.S. And the new proposal, it seems to me, in appearance, if not in fact, would make that selection process, can I be heard? Okay, even more politically partisan than it is now. So my questions are, has the current system over 40 years led to the appointment of poor or mediocre judges? If so, who are they? And if not, why change the system?
Well, thank you for the question, and just want to explain a little bit about how we do select judges in the state of Iowa and why we're looking at changing it. In, I believe, this early 60s, the Constitution of Iowa was changed so that the selection of judges was not based on elections. It wasn't based on the governor just solely making a choice like other states. We have what you call a merit-based selection. And that means there is a board of people that come together, interview all the judges, and provide some choices to the governor to choose from. So right now, at the state level, there's 16 people on that commission. 8 of them are selected by the governor. 8 of them are selected by the bar members. So if you're a lawyer, you get a vote on those 8 people. If you're not a lawyer, tough luck. You have no say. And so it's 8 to 8. 8 chosen by the lawyers, 8 chosen by the governor. And then there's one who is the senior justice of the state Supreme Court, who is the chair. So right now that's Justice Wiggins. And so as we look at this process and what's happened over time, we have one of the most activist courts in the country as well, the 49th or the second most liberal court, so 49 out of 50, and we are very activist. And so what we are doing is taking a look at why that is and if we should make changes. The Constitution said it was going to be set up a certain way for 10 years, and after 10 years, the legislature can change that if they want. And so the current proposal out there says that the governor will still choose 8. The bar is no longer going to choose, but the leaders of the legislature will choose. So the Democrats will have 4 choices, the Republicans will have 4 choices. And so To me, that sounds fair. So no matter what, it's never going to be all Republicans on there. It's never going to be all Democrats on there. There's always going to be minimum 4 Democrats and minimum 4 Republicans if those leaders choose someone from their own party, which they presumably would. And we think that would be more representative of the people, as opposed to letting the 10,000 judges, and only about 1,000 of them actually vote on it, select half of that commission. The other issue that I have with the commission is when you have lawyers serving on that commission, and that commission is overseen by the Chief Justice, who they practice in front of, that might be a conflict of interest if the senior justice is saying, you know what, I really think we should do these 3. Those lawyers might say, you know what, I have to practice in front of this guy, maybe we should do that. And so what we want to do is create a fair system. We understand, people tell me all the time, well, someday Republicans won't be in charge. I understand that. That's why we want a fair system. So no matter who's in charge, there's always going to be 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats. And just the last point on this, that kind of highlights what I think the inequity in it is, after 8 years of Governor Culver's and Vilsack, the commission was 14 Democrats, 2 Republicans. It took 8 years, and then finally Branstad got it to where it's 9-7 after 8 years. And so we just want it more fair, and we're looking at options to do that, and I think that we probably will pass a bill out of the Senate regarding that.
Thank you for the question. This is an incredibly important issue. I'm really glad it got brought up. I'm really frustrated by this legislation. I think this is a solution in search of a problem. This is not an issue that literally anyone campaigned on. And to me, this is saying, we're not happy with the decisions that are being made, and so we're going to change the people who make the decisions. And I want to address the actual makeup of these commissions and just kind of compare them to voters as a whole, because the argument is voters should have a say and it should be more representative of who's in this state and that sort of thing. So I've got charts. I like charts. And I've got a lot of different pages, so I could break it down by district if we really wanted to. But as a comparison, general voters in this state, Republicans 32.5%, no party 36%, Democrats 31.5%. So generally speaking, a third, right? If we combine the members of the Judicial Nominating Commission, so all of the district nominating commissions in the state, it breaks out to those members of the commissions, their party affiliation. 62% Republican, 8% no party, 30% Democrat. Just think about it for a second. So Republicans outnumber Democrats 2-1 on Iowa's judicial nominating commissions. I don't have a problem with that. I don't because of how our selection process works. And I think it is more than reasonable and fair that the governor gets to nominate some of those folks. I also think it's completely reasonable and fair for members of the bar to be a part of this process. Because when you think about it, for any professional sort of thing, who do you go to for advice and decision making? It's the people that know how these jobs work, right? Attorneys know what judges need to be like, right? Because this is their profession. If you have a medical problem, are you gonna go to the voters to ask what to do about it, or are you gonna go talk to a doctor? I mean, just take a second and think about what the implications are here. We want people who know what is at stake and know how the process works to be able to make reasonable choices. And I can go through, and I'm happy to share this because I want to be able to get to more questions, but go through the makeup and how it actually is, and that it is fairly representative. And I will also add that when we talk about voters having a say in this, they do. We have judicial retention elections. And so if you are unhappy with the decisions that are being made, or you think someone's doing a terrible job on the bench, then you have every opportunity to vote them out. So again, solution in search of a problem, keep it merit-based, keep it fair.
Okay. Our next question, and please refrain from applause. This is an informational thing. We understand you have certain views, but let's refrain from the applause. Next up, Norma Brenneman.
It's right here.
Right there, very close.
Just make sure you go right up.
Talk real close. Yeah, I'm short. Hi, my name is Nora Brenneman. I live at 1205 Southeast Rio Drive here in Ankeny. I personally represent NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and the Amos cluster here in town, which is the 7 churches who are working for social justice. First of all, I'd like to thank Representative Landon and Senator Whitver for your support last year for getting the complex needs bill passed for mental health. And Heather has been active in NAMI for many years and has been very supportive too. Even though you didn't get a vote for that, I know you supported it, okay? Now Amos and NAMI are advocating for a stable funding stream for the complex needs bill, and as Heather mentioned, adequate funding for the new children's mental health system. This is wonderful stuff, but it won't work, it won't go, it won't be in existence unless we have money for it. That's just bottom line. So my question is, what do you guys see, realistically envision the legislature doing this year to actually fund these bills?
I can only speak for the Senate at this time, but I've been working for several months on this issue as far as a stable, reliable funding source for mental health. Right now, mental health is paid for by property taxes. We're one of very few states that actually uses property tax for mental health. Usually those type of people services are done at the state level. And so what I've talked to our caucus about is trying to find a way to get that off of property taxes altogether, and let's work on it at the state level. And I think we do have some ideas. We're still working through details, and so I don't want to share something and scare people when it's not complete yet. And so we're working on those details. But my thought is, I'm one of those people that Mayor Lorenz talks about that I think property taxes are too high. And when you look at that, it's because we put a lot of different things on property taxes. It's not just your city, but it's your school, it's your county, it's your DART transportation, it's mental health, it's community college, it's broadlawns. All those have levies. And if you really want to reduce property taxes, to me, the best thing is take some of that stuff off of property tax that shouldn't be on there. And so that's what we're working on in the Senate. I'm not sure what the House is working on, but I'm fairly optimistic we can get something through the Senate at least that says we're not going to pay for mental health on property taxes anymore.
Yeah. And I don't work on it in my budget, but I would tell you that there's just been a infinite amount of discussion about this issue in the House as to how to fund whatever's set up. It's a little bit what comes first, the cart or the horse, and it's pretty hard to fund when you don't have a if you don't have a program already in place. So that's why the design of the program comes first. You can't fund something that you don't know what the rules are or how it's going to be done. So that's why that's taking place. But I do expect that there will be funding. We generally don't create programs that we don't intend to fund. So it does take some time to work these issues through. So I think that that's the intent of it.
Great question. I'll just say, because I have really no control over the budget at this point, that I think it's incredibly important that we figure out how to ensure that both our adult mental health system and whatever is determined for children is funded at a rate that meets the needs. The levy situation is a problem for a lot of counties. It is a huge problem for Polk County, as Steve mentioned, and we've talked about this probably a million times, and that does need to be addressed. I'm really curious to see how, as this goes along, if we continue to do adult mental health through a levy, but do children's through a direct appropriation, possibly how all of that's going to work too. So I'm interested in what Senator Whitver is talking about with the possibility of changing that too, because I would certainly be open to these conversations about, you know, if we do change it from moving property taxes to something out of the general fund, I'm certainly willing to entertain anything as long as we ensure that people are still receiving care and that the dollar amount that's going into it, if we change it, isn't going to be less than what it is right now. So I just want to, I'm open to conversations, want to be cautious about what the implications could be.
Thank you. Next up, Mary McAdams.
My question is on vouchers. I pay my taxes to support kids who go to public schools in my neighborhood. I am concerned that the school voucher bill will pull important money from the school system, which I already think is underfunded, and I know that you approved a 2.06%. I think it's been underfunded for years and years and years. I would have liked to have seen 3%. But I worry that the school voucher bill is going to pull important money from the public school system. Do you plan to support the school voucher bill? And if so, why?
We don't have a bill like that in the House that I'm aware of. So I've never supported a voucher system since I've been there.
I guess first of all, I would disagree we're underfunding schools. We have added $845 million plus in the last 8 years since I've been there to K through 12, so that's a different conversation. I just wanted to point that out, that we have added over $800 million in the last 8 years. But there is a educational savings account bill that did survive the funnel in the Senate over the last, there's been bills filed for years on this. Last year, a bill survived funnel to start phasing in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and then add a grade every year. We didn't have the votes for that in the Senate. I didn't call it up for a vote, and so that didn't happen last year. The bill that was filed this year in regards to the private school pared that down and said they want to allow kids that have individual education plans, IEPs, or disabled or disabilities to use their school dollars to go where they see is best for them. So it related only to people with disabilities or individual education plans. And so that bill, I didn't think it was going to have the votes to get through committee, but it did yesterday or Wednesday. It did pass through committee. I think likely what's going to happen in the Senate, at least, is there's going to be a focus on increasing the STO, which is people donating money, getting a tax credit for it, and helping to fund scholarships for people using private schools. That's probably more likely than vouchers at this point.
I'll just say that I'm really disappointed that this is coming up again this year, even if it's somewhat limited in scope. I do not support vouchers in any shape, way, or form. I think it is detrimental to our public schools. I'm glad we have a school board member in the audience today because I know that he has very strong feelings about this as well. And the truth of the matter is, when we talk about just being able to give one student kind of this amount of money to take wherever, it's not like any kid in a public school gets a backpack of money to go somewhere. I mean, it's an amount of money that is determined per pupil to go to the schools as a whole to pay for all the teachers, to pay for the benefits, to pay to keep the lights on. The amount of money it costs to keep the lights on in a school doesn't change regardless of how many kids are there. So when you start saying, great, well, we'll just take this $7,000 dollars per student and just send it with a kid somewhere else, that is, no matter what anyone says, going to affect the amount of money that's going to our public schools. So if the bill makes it out of the Senate and happens to come up in the House, I will not support it.
Thank you. Next question comes from Ben Chapman.
Good afternoon. My wife and I put solar panels on our house a few years ago, and we're addressing that issue today. I just loved it when Steve started reading that bill because nobody could understand it, and that's what the solar bill looks like. It's incomprehensible. So what Mid-American is doing is they're saying people with solar panels are cost shifting on someone else. They're saying I'm not paying my fair share. That's insulting, it's offensive, and it's untrue. We pay the same basis rate as everybody else in this room, and when we produce excess electricity, it just goes into their lines and it goes to our neighbors. And we do that when there's peak electric in the summer, when it's hot and they need more energy. It saves the cost of them transporting the energy across the lines, and they've been asking us to conserve energy for years, and that's what we're doing.
Your question, please.
Yeah, well, my question is just, what are the legislators' position on this? And I do want to mention that we have a person from One Source Solar here also who signed up. And I just wanted to mention that this will kill their business and other businesses. At the Chamber of Commerce, who's hosting us, we should be supporting those small businesses. Thank you.
This is a bill that the utility companies have brought forward to ask us to look at. It did survive the funnel. It's at that point, I don't serve on the subcommittees or committees anymore now that I'm leader, and so those bills have all got through the committee, probably 300 or 400 of them that are on my desk that I start to study and decide whether we want to do that bill or not. From my understanding on what this bill does, it creates equity when people are asked to pay fees for the grid. There's a fee to keep up the electric grid out there. If you're a Mid-American customer, you pay that. If you're a REC member, you pay that. If you're solar members, you don't have that fee.
We do have that fee. Who told you that?
That's what I'm hearing on that bill.
The utility told you that.
And so what is your fee compared to what a normal Mid-American person pays?
Exact $8.50 a month that everybody pays to hook up to Mid-American's grid.
Okay, so what's your understanding of what the bill does?
Refrain from applause.
So what's your understanding of what the bill does?
It adds fees specifically to solar customers.
That the other people don't pay?
Yes.
That Mid-American customers don't pay?
Extra fees for solar customers.
Okay, well, I'll look at that. That's not how I'm.
Interest. You should look at who brought this bill up.
Okay, well, I'll look at it. That's what we do. But my understanding is the fee isn't there for people that have solar, and everyone else is paying for it. And so that's what the conversation is.
Let the Iowa Utilities Board finish their 3-year study, and then we can find out how much value solar adds to the grid.
Yeah, that's what I'll do is look at it. But that's my understanding of the bill. So.
Representative Landon or Matson, do you have any-
I was told by leadership last week that there is not enough support to bring this to a vote in the House. So I'm going to take them at their word that that's where the bill's at right now.
So if it comes up, you'll oppose it and defend an Ankeny business?
That is what I told leadership my position was, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Again, we'll take questions in the order that they're asked. So thank you for refraining from that. I appreciate the discussion. It's a question and answer type of thing.
Yeah, I will say that I sat in on the committee while this was being discussed, and the testimony that was presented was that the rural electric cooperatives are paying $130 a fee for access to the grid that the two major public utilities customers do not pay. I would also tell you that it doesn't apply to anybody that is a current customer that has solar. It only applies to new hookups in the future, was my understanding of the bill.
That's how our business runs, with new hookups.
I get that,
Okay.
but the discussion, but some of the points were that it affected everybody, and that wasn't true. The effect is for new hookups, and they're looking for equity between the rural electric cooperatives and the public utilities. Now, you shake your head no, but I'm telling you that was the testimony that was presented to the committee. Were you there?
Yes.
Were you there at the committee?
Yes.
At the subcommittee or the Committee on Commerce?
I was at the subcommittee.
The subcommittee. I don't sit on that. I was at Commerce, and I didn't hear that. What I heard was that they were looking for equity between the public utilities and the rural electric cooperatives on supporting the grid. There's no rate increase generally to Iowans because the offset was that the non-solar customers' rates would go down for the public utilities. The reason I opposed the bill was because I never see that happen. I see the mechanism for it, but you can never show that the rates went down. And so I felt that the bill is flawed that way, and that's why I don't support it.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll just say that I don't support the bill for many of the reasons that have already been brought up, but most notably, well, number one, I want to support Ankeny businesses, and I also want to support solar. I think that's incredibly important. Renewable energy is important. Whatever we can do to help further that, I think that's something that should be considered. But really, the fact that we are in year 2 of a 3-year study, I feel like this legislation is just jumping the gun for no reason whatsoever. finish the study, let's collect the data, and if changes need to be made, then absolutely, let's have that conversation because we'll have the data to do it, rather than decide partway through a study that we're not happy with the way it's going.
Thank you. Next up is Roger Ralph.
Oh, wow. Nice. Don't think I'd make the cut. I know, this is a big mistake. First of all, I'd like to compliment the Chamber. There's just recently the Chamber's of Commerce has taken a closer look at their congressional report card and given itself a failing grade because they've tended to back the right side of the political spectrum, and they view bipartisanship as good for business. And that's great. So I applaud the Chamber. Here's this. If you haven't seen it, it's on the Chamber website. In that regard, my question is, in the spirit of bipartisanship, there's a number of bills, and I'm just going to read, and I'm not sure where they are in the funnel. Some of them may be dead because it's hard to kind of keep up. But HSB 184, which was the Mid-American bill that was talked about, SF 360, which is a bill for giving up parental rights, SB 1221, which is a bill that would cut support for public land, more gun rights, cutting support for public education, the death penalty, jurisprudence. It's a question. It's part of the question. Health care, and so on. How is this bipartisan? Because I saw a number of people there in support of defeating these bills. So
I'm not sure exactly how to answer that question other than to say we have looked at bills that passed through the House and the Senate, and over 80% are bipartisan votes. We've only taken 6 or 7 votes, I think, this year. I think everyone or almost everyone has been a bipartisan vote, including K through 12 funding. One of the Democrat assistant leaders voted for that. And so we do work in a bipartisan process. There are partisan bills that are filed. Some of them make funnel, some don't. I have no idea of those 10 or 15 bills you listed, which ones made funnel. I know some of them, but I don't know all those. But over 80% of the laws that we pass are bipartisan. And so I would expect that to continue, and probably even more so than the last 2 years.
Thanks. Thanks. I would say that in the House, it's even a higher percentage. We're closer to 90% on our bipartisan votes. I would say that the makeup of the legislature from 1846 on has been political. It is a political body. You will have political discussions, and you'll have political outcomes. I didn't invent that. None of the rest of this panel did. That's the way that Iowans have run that since 1846, and I expect that there's going to be some politics down there. So to say that how can every bill be can be bipartisan and non-political, I don't think that's reality. I don't think they can be. But for the most part, what I can tell you in the 7 years that I've been there, we do it because it's good for Iowans. That's why we pass the bills.
I think that overall there's been a lot of good bipartisan work so far, and I've been really happy about that. There definitely are some things that have happened so far and what I see coming down the road that make me a little nervous and know that maybe there won't be that bipartisanship. But I mean, certainly, as John said, yes, it's a political body, and that's definitely going to be true. And I think that it's incredibly important that if you believe in something, to stand up for it, right? And that we don't always have to go along to get along, that we should agree when we can and have civil discourse and, be willing to compromise when that makes sense. We should also be willing to stand on principle and fight back when we think it doesn't make sense. And so that's my approach and why I've been happy to support some of the things that I've supported so far, and know that there will be a time in the next 8 to whoever knows how many more weeks that isn't going to be the case. But I will do my best, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. It is 12:56. We have time for one more quick question. Next on the list is Shelley Silver. You made the cut too. We want to be respectful of the time. Try to get out of here as close to 1 o'clock as possible, so go ahead.
Okay, I live in Saylor Township, and I work in community-based corrections as a pre-sentence investigator. I interviewed a kid yesterday who has no parents, and he's selling drugs to make money. He can't join the armed forces because he has a peanut allergy. Many people I interview, and over my course of my career in 24 years in corrections, they don't have a trust fund. They don't have parents that can help them out. And they commit crimes, and I know that's not right. At the same time, jobs don't pay enough to help them make ends meet. And there are parents who are living off the state because they can't afford the child care. My kids are going to Iowa State, and sometimes we've had to help them pay rent because their jobs don't pay enough to pay their rent. So what can we do to help our kids be successful? Wouldn't it make more sense to invest in them on the front end? Like in the 70s, we used to pay for a 2-year college program or a vocational program. And instead of, wouldn't it make more sense to invest in them on the front end rather than invest on the back end by sending them to prison or having our department supervise them?
Great question, and certainly one that is not unique or new. We've discussed this many times in the legislature. I would tell you from my perspective, the AP classes that the high schools offer in this area in conjunction with DMAC become the heartbeat of Ankeny and this area. There are any number of kids that are earning up to a full year of college credit without any tuition, so they can go on and continue their education. We have great access to training programs for youth, both at DMAC and through state programs, and working now into the high schools. I think
that's great. I'm just saying that's not enough. It's not enough. We need to do more. So what can you do more?
We're implementing the programs that we're creating.
And part of the Future Ready Iowa program that we passed last year that is funded in our budget this year to encourage more people to get skills they need to work in this economy. A lot of those will be mostly 2-year degrees. I want to piggyback on what John's talking about with our concurrent enrollment, our high school kids taking community college credits.
Yeah, mine did. Mine did.
I think that's extremely important. As soon as the election was over last year, I talked to our education chair. I had met with some community college presidents, and they had identified, I don't recall the percentage, but a large percentage, a lot of kids do take dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment. There's still a large percentage that don't. And what I asked our education chair to do is find ways that we can encourage those people that are taking none of those credits to at least take 1 or 2 of those. Because I think sometimes 2-year or 4-year, that's scary. But if you can get those kids into a concurrent enrollment while they're at Ankeny High School, even if it's 1 class or it's 2 classes, they all of a sudden say, you know what, it's not that bad. I can do this for another 1.5 years. So there's a huge percentage of our kids that, maybe not huge, I don't know the percentage, but it's a decent chunk of our kids that are not taking that concurrent enrollment, and I think that's where our focus needs to be.
So when you talk about Ankeny, is it the same encouragement going to kids at Saydel? Because my kids went to Saydel. I'm in Saylor Township.
Yeah, I mean, what I did is had her work on a concurrent enrollment project or program, and in our budget that we released just had an extra $2 million going to concurrent enrollment to try to address this problem. But I think that's the best way to do it, is get the kids that aren't taking advantage of that, give them a little bit of experience with that community college so that they can understand what it is and maybe make that decision, yep, this is not that bad, I can do this for another 1.5 years.
Thanks for the question, Shelley. It's really good. I want to echo the part on concurrent enrollment. I think anything that we can do in that regard is important, ensuring that we are funding our community colleges at the rate that they need to be so that they can reach as many students as possible. Really important. And one of the things that I feel like we're getting back to this, and after taking a really big detour of talking about how 4-year college is the most important be-all, end-all of all things for our kids, recognizing that it isn't always the best way to go, and not because not everyone's ready for college, but because not everyone needs to go to a 4-year university to have an amazing career. And so I really appreciate that we have started to see more of a focus on the trades that provide amazing careers that are well paid. and doing all of the things that we can do to help make sure that kids know all of the opportunities that exist for them and really think about what path is going to get them where they want to go.
Okay, thank you. I do have collective bargaining issues that I'm going to get to on Wednesday, okay, Jack? Okay. We're there for a lobby day.
Thank you for everybody for coming today. We really appreciate it.